Only days after ordering the U.S. military into Venezuela to capture the president and his wife, Donald Trump is now blasting NATO. And the White House says the U.S. president's actively discussing how to acquire Greenland with military force on the table. Joining us to unpack it, Peter Mackay, former Canadian Defense and Foreign Affairs Minister. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Marla. How are you?
I'm good. How seriously do you take this White House statement about acquiring NATO should Denmark be preparing troops?
Well, look, I think you have to always give ample consideration to things that the President of the United States says, particularly this president. But how seriously do I think the possibility of the United States attacking Denmark is? Not very. I think, number one, there are much bigger priorities for him, although he has clearly coveted the critical minerals and the strategic advantage of having Greenland. But it's another NATO country. They're part of Denmark. There has been a lot of musing and a lot of bombast and a lot of braggadocious nature within this president. But a military attack is one thing. Trying to work out some sort of an association with them, keeping in mind that they have a military base in Thule, Greenland. They now call it Piftik, I believe. But there is a historic relationship there. Concerns about the vulnerability of the Arctic, which Canada shares. The fact that the U.S. has other similar type of relationships with countries where they provide security, that's a more realistic pursuit than any kind of an invasion, in my opinion.
Okay, we often hear Donald Trump sort of go big with the threats only to ratchet it down to come to some sort of agreement. And you're thinking that could be what happens here, some sort of agreement with Denmark and Greenland to get access to what that island offers?
Exactly. And using leverage like this by starting big, as you put it, and then working their way back. But look, the situation in the Arctic is serious. There is concern about Russia. There is concern about China, others navigating in or close to Canadian waters. And so this is something we need to keep an eye on. But, you know, we saw the Prime Minister in Europe telling Denmark, the president there, that, we stand with Denmark and our NATO allies. I think there's plans now to open an embassy there, visits from Canadians. We have to be a little bit careful walking that line, not poking the bear, so to speak. But I really don't think that this is going to be a pursuit, a realistic pursuit by the U.S. administration. And I think people like Marco Rubio are going to try to walk this back at some point in the near future.
You mentioned Arctic security. We know that Canada is trying to beef up the defense of the Arctic as part of its plans to put more money into sort of security itself. So is that threat at this point escalated to a level that perhaps Greenland needs a bigger military presence from the U.S., Canada, or others?
Well, I think I would focus more on what Canada has to do. And we've been in talks now for some time about improving the security around the Arctic. That includes a form of missile defense, although not likely the Golden Dome that the president has envisioned, but certainly finally pulling ahead with the fighter aircraft purchase. We need to recapitalize some of the airfields and infrastructure in the Arctic. Being able to operate this time of year and later into the winter is very difficult. Minus 40, minus 60 in some instances in pitch dark. And those waters are opening because of climate change. And so this has been on the government's radar, successive governments, for some time. But it's a massively expensive undertaking as well, and something we should be doing in concert, frankly, with the Americans, but with other Arctic Council countries. And we are drawing closer to those countries, including Finland and Sweden, who are now NATO allies, and working towards this ice pack realization where we are going to build, in concert with the Americans and the Finns, more icebreaker capability.
Okay, just to pick up on another thing we heard from Donald Trump today, that NATO is nothing and without the U.S., and we've heard the rhetoric before. But I just want your opinion on whether or not NATO could stand without the U.S.
Well, they could and they would. It's obviously not preferable. And I've sat at those NATO tables, to be honest with you, and we've been hearing complaints for some time, rightly so. We were not living up to the agreed upon 2% of GDP spending on national defense. We got close. And during Afghanistan, we were punching above our weight, as Canada has done for decades, but still not really paying our way, paying the freight, so to speak. And that has riled the Americans, successive governments, including Obama, Reagan, Bush, others. But we're getting there now, or so it seems. The commitment has been made. The money has not really been allocated or even identified as yet. So there is still some skepticism about whether we're going to be able to reach that capacity. But look, NATO, it has been and continues to be the most important military alliance in global history. And Canada is a founding member. We need and want the Americans to be part of it. But attacking another NATO country would see its unwinding potentially quite quickly.
Okay, let's also get quickly to another issue, which is a trip by our prime minister to China and a meeting with the leader there. What should the Canadian priorities be for Mark Carney?
Well, I think trying to work out some sort of trade arrangement that at least sees the dropping of tariffs. They have tariffs on Canadian canola and seafood and pork. We, in turn, have put tariffs on aluminum and steel and EVs, vehicles. So working out some of that, I suspect any trip, and I've been in some of those meetings with Chinese officials, there may be talk of human rights concerns towards Uyghurs, Tibetans, Falun Gong worshippers. We've seen Canadians kidnapped. We've seen intellectual property being stolen by China. They have an abysmal record when it comes to human rights. And so those items often come up. So those discussions are delicate. But let's be clear, the trade deficits that we have with the United States, or shouldn't say deficits, we do approximately $700 billion annually. It's much, much less with China, although a lot. So there's capacity to grow, but we're never going to supplant or completely replace that trade with the United States. And again, we have to be careful and cognizant of the fact that China and the United States are on a knife's edge as well. And so we don't want to go too far in suggesting that we're going to sell them our surplus energy, which questionably we can't get to them because we don't have the necessary infrastructure. Nor do we, as we saw in the case of recognizing Palestine or coming down too hard on the side of those who are criticizing the United States, the president takes it very personally. So caution has to be part of that trip to China. I suggest we can also do more with other countries in the region that are more closely aligned, that are democratic, like Japan, South Korea, not just talking to the Chinese Communist Party.
All right, Peter Mackay, sir, got to leave it there. But thank you for your time. Appreciate you joining us on The Close today.